All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about the concept of the etheric body. And we're going to basically go through the analysis of why I kind of felt the need to appeal to this idea. This is a very common idea in New Age circles, but when I was thinking about these ideas and formulating this theory and thinking about my experiences, I too felt the need to sort of come up with this idea to kind of make everything work. So we're going to basically explain my analysis, go through my analysis of why I think this is a true idea and how I think it works. So we talked about, just to recap a little tiny bit, we talked about in the last chapter how chi energy is basically a substance that your spirit is able to use, and it uses it largely through the subconscious action of motion. We'll talk a little more about that later. But your spirit is able to use this substance. It doesn't have an infinite amount of it. It has to recharge this substance. And I believe it recharges every time you sleep. But it has a substance that is able to use to affect change, right, in physical matter. Now, it can also affect change in the spirit realm too, but we're just talking about physical matter. And just to go over this first point, which this is going to answer a very basic question that we kind of posited in chapter 6, I think, of book 1. And just to go over this point, it says long-term charges cause change in the body. Long-term charges cause changes in the body. How does this occur? Now, this was something we didn't really go over too much at the time, but we basically spoke about this general concept, right? So if you have a prolonged charge, if you just keep charging a certain charge for a long period of time, or charging at a certain frequency and having a certain intention, you're going to actually notice your body start to change, right, in response to that charge. And I actually talked about that in book 1 when I talked about my experience with anxiety and depression, right, that I had from sleep apnea. It took me about a month, but I had to deep charge my way out of that, right? I had to keep charging my subconscious until my body started to change in response to that charge. I had to change it away from the state of being depressed and having anxiety. And then it just basically went away. And so how does that occur? How does the subconscious simply charging affect this kind of change in the body? Now, we kind of went through it already. We talked about the silver cord connection. But even that only explains that only talks about really the way the subconscious interacts with the body. It interacts with the body in two different ways. So we talked about the silver cord connection and transcendental connection. But it ultimately doesn't fully explain this idea, though. The long-term changes in the body as a result of subconscious charging. Is the silver cord doing some type of work? Is the silver cord interacting with the body and affecting this change in some way? How is the change actually occurring? What's the medium, right, that is facilitating this change? Well, the silver cord is part of it, but I believe the main medium facilitating this change is your chi, your chi energy. Is your chi energy has the ability to influence matter or change it and affect it. Right, so we actually see a smaller case of this simply with the placebo effect and the concept of stress. So we went over that. When you generally think more positively, that has a more positive effect on your body, which we're actually going to talk more about that in a moment. But when you think negatively, that tends to have a more negative effect on your body, which we basically just call stress. That whole phenomenon we just call stress. But it's just more pronounced when it comes to long-term charges, right? And I was going to say, there are probably other things I could do to sort of demonstrate interesting changes, interesting changes in my body in response to long-term charges, right? And so you could see, I'm sure if I look it up, I'll see different kinds of things people have done that have been probably a little weird that science couldn't explain, but this would ultimately be the reason. And what's actually happening is your chi is constantly affecting a change in your body, slowly, over time, right? So ultimately, the way your subconscious interacts with your body in general, right, I believe is through your chi. Now, to go to this next point, it says the subconscious induces change within the body, which we kind of already went over that, induces change within the body through chi. Now, there's one thing about this that it kind of answers that question of how the subconscious can induce a change when it charges in a long-term way, how it can induce changes in the body. So it kind of answers that question. But there's still one issue, and this issue ultimately comes from experience. So this is just something I came up with, or I noticed when I was experiencing controlling my subconscious by controlling or using my subconscious to control my chi, right? So when I used to do this, like I said, I never really did this that much, but I think I did it enough to kind of understand this stuff. Basically, I was just doing it to formulate the theory on how this stuff works. But when I was charging my subconscious to basically heal my body, that's the main one I used. I did use another one for a long time, but that was figuring out how this works. I wasn't actually doing it successfully. When I was using my chi to heal my body, then I knew exactly what to do. But when I was doing this, right, I noticed that I needed to focus directly on the target, right, which is pretty much everything we've been talking about, right? So we have an intention, a manifestation intention, or even a sensory intention, right? Or sense intention, because this is they're both psychic abilities. You have to focus on the target, and the command component of your intention has to express something, right? So it can express the command to sense a target, or expresses the command to change a target, right, in some way. And I noticed that when I charge my subconscious to heal, I have to focus on my body. And I have to express the intention to heal, right? So that I never get that type of charge, right? Because that's a psychic ability. My pineal gland always responds when I charge my subconscious to heal. And I use the technique we talked about for charging psychic energy. If I just use a normal technique we talked about for just charging emotions, things like that, I never was able to charge my subconscious to heal, right? So no matter what I did, if I just held the intention to heal and just charged it the normal way, it just wouldn't work. Right? I didn't know at the time that was a psychic ability. So, but I wasn't using that kind of charge, right, when I would charge my subconscious in a way that caused long-term changes, or even short-term changes, like the placebo effect and stress, right? So something's off here, right? Something isn't quite right. How is my chi energy changing my body, right, if I'm not focusing on my body and holding an intention to say change, right? Because when I was healing my body, that didn't happen at all. It didn't just do it from me focusing on other things and just going about my day, right? I had to actually use the technique we talked about for charging psychic energy, right? But so it basically there's a kind of a dichotomy here. On the one hand, let's say I'm just going about my day and people make me upset and they cause me to be angry. Let's say I'm constantly watching negative TV and negative movies, and I'm constantly doing things that make me angry. I'm going to constantly be angry all day. I'm going to charge a feeling of anger. And what's that going to cause? It's going to cause stress. So something that would tell me that my chi, in that case, if we're accepting this framework, right, that would tell me that my chi is causing negative changes in my body. That's what stress is. And if I watch positive things and I'm around people that make me happy and I constantly do things that make me happy and I have a sort of pattern of thinking where I'm just constantly happy, I'm going to notice a positive effect on my body, which is generally, I don't know what the term is, right? So I just appeal to the concept of the placebo effect. Generally, these are just psychosomatic changes, right? Which psychosomatic changes, if I'm not mistaken, the people in the psychology community can correct me if I'm wrong, but psychosomatic effects are just effects on the body that result from your mind and your pattern of thinking. But I just talk about psychosomatic changes in terms of stress and the placebo effect. I just use the term placebo effect for the positive psychosomatic changes. But both of those you can see those occur without me really thinking about the body or expressing a command to tell my body to heal or function better or function worse, right? So just by interacting with certain things and having a pattern of thought, right, my chi's affecting my body. However, when I heal my body, right, which is actually using psychic energy, I have to focus on my body. In other words, experience has taught me that I will absolutely not get the same effect, right? If I focus on, let's say I even focus on things that kind of make me think about healing, right? So let's say I'm watching movies about some healer, right? Because that's how it would kind of work, right? So by the reflection principle, if I'm watching a movie that's based on healing, I would keep producing intention at the healing frequency, right? Let's say I'm just around that and people keep talking about healing and they keep telling me I'm going to feel better. I would keep producing the intention to heal, right? And for sure, my body would charge at the healing frequency to some degree. But from in my experience, that's completely different from when I'm directly charging the healing frequency and charging psychic energy. To do that, I have to focus on my body and expressly command heal. I'm not going to be able to do it focusing on that or anything else and expressing some intention that doesn't say heal. However, in other cases, I can still get a prolonged change in my body if I'm not focusing on my body at all or telling it to heal. I could just be around people that make me happy and now my body's changing in some way. So something's off here, right? There seems to be two different types of ways that I'm able to get my chi to affect change in my body. And when I thought about it, I basically came up with this idea here. And just to note it here, it says chi energy can change the body in two different ways. A more automatic and unfocused way, which is a silver cord connection, and a more focused and manual way, which is a transcendental connection. This transcendental connection is ultimately one associated with psychic energy. That's the one we're really going to be talking about in the chapter. But that's basically a conclusion I came to, right? Fundamentally, it must be the case that chi energy manifests or causes change in your body in two different ways. And we pretty much already went over it, but the more automatic, unfocused way is just like, I don't have to focus on my body at all, right? And that chi is still going to cause change in my body. So if I just go about my day, interacting with others, if I have a day that's constantly, if throughout my day or even my week, I'm constantly in situations that cause me to produce a negative intention, that's going to cause my chi to sort of manifest negatively, right? We haven't really gone over that too much, but if I have a negative intention, my chi is going to start trying to manifest in a negative way or negative outcomes in my body, which is just stress, like I said. I don't have to think about my body. I don't have to focus on my body. I don't have to command my body. I'm just literally focusing on other people, other things. I could be focused on problems in my life, all types of things. But that's still going to cause a change in my body. And my chi is still going to be causing changes in my body in response to those thoughts that are not directed toward my body at all, right? And that's just done automatically, and it's unfocused in the sense that I'm not focusing on my body at all. So that's one of the ways that chi manifests, just basically based on what you're thinking about throughout your day. That's one of the ways chi causes a change in your body. Now, the more manual and focused way, like I said, is a transcendental way. That's the way where you have to focus on your body. I cannot cause chi to cause a change in my body unless I'm focused on my body. I can't, like I said before, I can't focus on that or that or that or that and get the same change. It'll never happen unless I focus on my body and say, my body, do this, right? So that's the fundamental difference between these two types of ways to control your chi. Now, another thing to go over is this point, which is interesting. It says, positive prolonged charges affect vitality. Positive prolonged charges affect vitality positively, and negative prolonged charges hurt your vitality. So this was another thing that I noticed. So we kind of already went over this with the concept of stress and the placebo effect. Now, in other words, if you're very, very happy and you're having fun and you're laughing and you're having a good time, you're going to notice that your body overall just has generally has a more positive effect in response to your mood, right? So that would be the silver cord connection. So your chi is affecting your body in the automatic and unfocused way. Just by you having a wonderful time, you notice your body is functioning better. And if you're having a bad time and people make you angry and you have so many problems and you're constantly focusing on negative things, even negative music or negative movies, you're going to notice your body's vitality is dropping a little bit, right? Which we call stress. That's just basically just the term. What I mean by that is I'm just referring to stress. And so this is another thing that's interesting. If you think about it, both of these phenomena, right? Both of these effects are, in theory, should be the result of something impacting or affecting my chi, right? If we accept the framework that my chi is a thing that is allowing my subconscious to cause changes in my body, right? We see that positive emotions allow my chi to affect my body in a more positive way, and negative emotions cause my chi to affect my body in a more negative way. But more specifically, positive emotions, they seem to affect my vitality, and positive emotions affect my vitality in a positive way. Negative emotions affect my vitality in a negative way. If we put those thoughts together, what it's kind of telling me is that my chi is impacting my vitality, right? And I don't have to think about my body and tell it to do that. So in other words, not using a transcendental connection. I don't have to focus on my body and tell my chi to cause my body to behave more vitally. So feel like it has more life in it and be more healthy and things like that. So if I really think about it, it seems almost like my chi is sort of, it's being used in some way to, how do I want to word it? It's being used in some way to affect my body's vitality without me thinking about it. So in a more automatic way. It seems like when I think negatively, it just gets in the way of that vitality, or it reduces it reduces the effect of chi increasing the vitality of my body. And when I think positively, it seems to make it easier for the chi to increase the vitality of our body. So when I'm thinking about this, basically when I was thinking about all of this and I put it all together, that was basically the conclusion I came up with. It seems like chi on its own is being used to affect my vitality of my body. In other words, it seems like it's being used to make my body run better, right? And it seems ultimately, before I get to the next point, it seems like my chi is being used to make my body just run better. And it just seems like it has a harder time doing what it's naturally doing. So it's doing this without me sort of saying anything. But when I think negatively, it's like I'm charging energy that impedes what it's already doing. Even though it's already doing it without me saying anything or thinking about it or commanding it on a conscious level, when I do charge negative energy on a conscious level or from what my conscious mind is doing, it seems to impede in this natural function that's already occurring automatically. And when I think positively, it seems to help it occur a little bit better, even though it's occurring automatically. And so what that ultimately comes down to is this next point. So this is another thing I kind of started to believe about all of this. And that's that chi energy must naturally be regulated in terms of what it's manifesting. Chi energy must naturally be regulated in terms of what it's manifesting and how it's regulated to support vitality. I kind of wrote that a little bit weird. But what I'm getting at there is that we talked about how chi, to use it transcendentally, right, you would use a manifestation intention, right? So your manifestation intention says do this, or focus on a target and says change in this way, right? But in this case, you can see my chi is doing something right inside my body without my mind telling it to do anything. So who's the one giving it the command to manifest in my body to help my body run better, to help support my vitality, right? It seems like there's something that's regulating my chi naturally without my mind doing anything at all, just like my ground state, right? So we talked about how my brain sends commands to my subconscious and causes it to charge in a way that gives me a certain level of performance and causes my subconscious to stay in a certain state, right? I don't have to do that consciously. My body does all the work, so it's charging my subconscious to do that. In a sense, my brain is regulating my subconscious mind. Now, my conscious mind is still involved too. If I want my subconscious to do something transcendental, then I'll just use my conscious mind. And so your chi energy basically functions the same way. Something's commanding it to do something without your conscious mind doing any work. And from what it seems like in terms of how I feel in my experiences, it seems like something's regulating it, telling it to help my body function better, right? And when I think negatively, actually before I get into that, it seems like something's commanding it and telling it to help my body function better. And it seems like that particular manifestation of chi is more of a positive manifestation, or my subconscious needs to be on a positive frequency to manifest that type of change. In other words, we didn't talk too much about the connection between chi and frequency and things like that. We'll talk more about that later. But suffice it to say that chi can manifest, you can use a positive intention to manifest chi and a negative intention to manifest chi, right? We talk more about that in the section on transcendental chi control. I believe. But I'll just say it now. But chi can when you have a negative intention or a negative manifestation intention, your chi is going to be more destructive, right? But when you have a positive manifestation intention, so your subconscious on a positive frequency, when you're holding this intention, your chi is going to be more constructive. It's going to do something that we would generally consider good. And supporting the body, it seems like, requires your subconscious to be on a positive frequency. So that's a positive manifestation intention, right? And so when you think negatively, you start to charge negative energy. So your subconscious energy starts to charge at a negative frequency. And that tends to make it harder for your subconscious to express itself in a positive way, which we pretty much talked about. That's just pretty much dampening, right? So if let's say you deep charge a negative emotion, right? So you deep charge at negative frequency, you can still feel positive emotions, but you can't feel them that strongly because it's like the negative emotions are weighing down your ability to feel that positive emotion. Similarly, right? When you deep charge up positive emotions, or you deep charge at a positive frequency, you can still feel negative emotions, but you don't feel them that much. It's much harder to feel them because the positive emotions are weighing down your subconscious. So you see a similar phenomenon with your chi energy. So this thing is regulating your subconscious, or is regulating your chi, right, to support your body, to manifest in a way that supports your body's vitality. But your subconscious needs to be on a positive frequency, or stay around the positive frequency to do that most optimally, because manifesting your chi in that manner is positive. So when you charge when you charge your subconscious at a negative frequency, it tends to interfere in this automatic process going on that's telling your chi to manifest vitality in your body. So it like weighs it down. And when you deep charge in positive emotions or deep charge at a positive frequency, it helps this automatic process going on in your body because this is a positive manifestation, right? So that's basically what I realized, and that's where the placebo effect and stress come from, right? So, but ultimately, it seems like your body's something's telling your chi, which we can for now just assume it's your body, just like your ground state. So in other words, your body is sending a command to your subconscious to charge, basically to charge a tiny bit of psychic energy. This would almost be like the normal level of psychic energy, but it's charging your subconscious to use a normal level of psychic energy to impact your spirit to manifest chi in your body in a positive way, and more specifically in a way that helps the body to run better and supports it, increases its vitality. So that command ultimately is coming from your body, and it's doing it all the time. Now you can also sort of increase that command to a degree. Like I said, you'd have to check with God if that's okay. I'll talk a little more about that later. That's the one thing I did that I didn't feel like a loss of, I didn't get depressed for. So it was easy to charge spiritual energy and hold the command to heal my body. But I'll talk more about that later. Still, I would check with God for that, because that's a supernatural thing to do. However, you can technically still do this, charge your subconscious to increase your vitality in a more transcendental way. So that in that case, you'd be using your intention, you would focus on your body and charge your subconscious to express your chi to say heal your body, which we'll talk more about that later. Now, here's the thing though. We kind of run into another issue here, right? So if your chi is constantly manifesting vitality in your body, it's constantly being used to manifest in your body to say run better and do this better and this better, and basically support life. Well, when I'm using chi in a more transcendental way, like I said before, I have to focus on the thing that I want to change, right? So if I wanted my body to run better, right, and I was doing this transcendentally, I just focus on my body more generally and just say heal. If I wanted my hand to heal, I have to focus on my hand and say heal. I can't focus on the light, I can't focus on the door, I have to focus on my hand. Nor can I focus on my foot, right? It has to be my hand. But in this case, right, so the body seems to be regulating my chi automatically, and it's helping my body to run better. But is it doing that in a more general way? How is it causing my heart to run better? How is it causing my muscles to run better? How is it causing my organs to run better? I suppose it could do it in a general way, but because I feel like chi is so specific, this is just based on my experience and and just theorizing about this as well, I feel like the command to help my heart run better, or the way my chi would be expressed in my heart to help it run better, would be a little bit different from the way my chi is expressing itself in my kidney, right, to run better, or in my muscles, or in my intestines, and so on, right? But the body's not focusing on any of these one things as far as I know, right? The mind can do it, but the body's not focusing on this and this and this and this. At least it doesn't have the ability, it doesn't have like a free will to focus on those different things at the same time and command my subconscious to charge. The only way it makes sense to me, right, the only thing I could think of to sort of explain this is to say that there must be kind of like, you know how you have blood vessels? Blood vessels go all throughout your body and deliver nutrients through every muscle, everything in your body, right? That's how it gets oxygen and nutrients to be alive and to survive, eat all the different sections of your body. I feel like there's a similar phenomenon with your chi, right? The way, in order to make these ideas work, right, it must be the case, I feel like, that there must be sort of almost like channels going throughout your body. Channels where your chi energy moves, and your chi energy moves through those channels to certain parts of your body, and it tells the chi will tell that part of your body to function better, right, to support life. So there are channels going throughout my spiritual body. For now, we'll just say that, going throughout my spiritual body to help my heart run better. And so chi runs into my heart, and that chi is trying to manifest the command. So not necessarily intention, because this is coming from the body, right? So, but it's manifesting the command that says, run better, heart, right? Something like that. So just telling my heart to run better. And so the chi goes into my heart, and it alters the matter, which is my heart, and causes it to run more smoothly, right? To support life. That command is a little bit different from the command that goes to my muscles, because my muscles, my arms muscles are a different muscle from the ones in my heart. They function a little differently, so the chi has a slightly different command there, but ultimately the effect is still to run better. And there are channels going to my intestines, my lungs, my brain, and so on and so forth, my cells. So in other words, I feel that there are channels going through all throughout your body, and chi is going out through all of them, just like your blood vessels, and it's sending a command to run better. And ultimately, that comes down to this, and that says the etheric body is a metaphysical network of pathways. So I believe in chi, traditional Chinese culture. It might be related to Qigong, but maybe not. I believe those channels are called meridians, right? So I just put that term there. But the etheric body is a metaphysical network of pathways, or parentheses, meridians, that convert or program and chi energy and deliver that chi throughout your body. So in other words, that's what the etheric body is. So in order to make all these ideas work, right, it seems like there has to be a separate body, because I don't think these channels are native directly to your spirit, because presumably your spirit survives without the body. There's really no reason for your spirit to continuously have all these channels, right? And these aren't physical channels, right? Your blood vessels are, but these aren't. So these are like something in between the physical and spirit, right? The permanent spirit. This is something else. This would be something presumably you'd only have during the time you're alive, but it's still metaphysical. So that's why I came up with this idea of the etheric body. In order to make everything work, it seems like there has to be another body here that's doing something with your chi energy. And so that's the etheric body. Now, ultimately, I believe your etheric body is the one, it like supports your physical body. Now, I don't have enough knowledge about biology and medical science and things to sort of analyze this theory right now further, but I suspect, right? I suspect that if I studied it more, I imagine that the normal function of the body that we observe in science and just really every day, not really every day, but in science at a microscopic level, if you really go into detail with it, I suspect, right, and this is just a theory, right, because I don't have enough knowledge to sort of present evidence, supporting evidence for this idea yet. However, I suspect that if you look at the way your body functions, you're not really going to be able to explain it more fully, right, on its own. Because in science, they say there's no such thing as metaphysics and the mind is not supernatural and all this nonsense. I think it's complete nonsense. I don't think that makes any sense at all. I feel like there's a million holes in that way of thinking. But I suspect that if you have this idea, right, there are going to be so many phenomena in your body that you can't explain. And this is like I was saying before, right? When I was talking about psychic abilities in general, right, I was saying how when I had finally done psychic abilities, and I realized like they're really not that big a deal. There's no way this isn't going to show up in experiment sometimes, right? They're a little bit hard to use, but they're not so hard that they're never going to show up. And when I looked at the data just a little bit, I didn't look at the direct experimental data precisely, but when I looked at the experiments, a basically overview of the experiments, I'm like, oh, it actually did exactly what I predicted was going to happen, right? And what science just says is always they just make up some excuse. When something supernatural occurs that they can't explain, they come up with a million excuses, just like atheists, right? And they'll come up with some excuse to say why what happened didn't really happen, right? And that's basically the fundamental mantra of atheism, right? Whatever happened didn't really happen. There's always some reason, a million excuses why it didn't actually happen, right? And they don't have to make a prediction to say, if I do this, this will happen, this will happen. No, it's just whatever happened didn't happen. I don't have to make a prediction. And yet you can still consider my belief science instead of just a faith. But ultimately, when I looked at the data, I was like, no, right? This psychic abilities shown, like I said, they show up in the exact way I believe. And I suspect, or the exact way that I suspected they did. And I suspect something similar is the case with the body. I suspect the body, if you look at the body, there are going to be so many things the body's doing that you just cannot explain in terms of just, I call it Brownian motion, right? So I know a lot of scientists and biologists would say, no, that's not Brownian motion, that's not diffusion to a solution. I get it, right? But for the most part, we're talking about Brownian motion, right? Doesn't matter how organized it is, doesn't matter how controlled it is. You're basically talking about just movement that is not sort of controlled by consciousness, basically, right? If movement that's not controlled by consciousness can fundamentally be reduced to Brownian motion. I know that's not how it's normally used, but it's basically the same thing. And so they're basically saying that if you talk about how the cells move through the body and how the body supports itself or supports life, it all can be explained just through random motion of the cells and random motion of chemicals and things like that. It may be very sophisticated random motion, but it's still random motion. There's no intelligence guiding it, right? I don't think that's true, right? I suspect that if I were to study it, I would find that that's absolutely not true. There are things that go on in the body that you cannot explain without appealing to this idea that there's some kind of intelligence behind it or some type of intelligence supporting it, right? There has to be something supporting it that's causing certain phenomena to occur basically that you can't explain without it, right? Without appealing to this idea of some external intelligence. And that external intelligence, of course, is your chi energy, right? So, I mean, you can kind of already see that with the placebo effect. Like I said, in science, usually they'll just make up any random excuse to sort of fit this idea of materialism, despite all its holes, and there's always holes in it. Usually they just make up a random excuse to sort of make what you're observing fit in with this framework of materialism, which is more or less just a faith-based religion. It's not science, right? However, actually what I was going to say is that usually they do that, but I was kind of surprised because I noticed they didn't actually do that with the placebo effect, right? So, which is a positive psychosomatic response to positive intentions, right? So when you have the placebo effect, let's say you just think positively and you have positive interactions and you're in a good mood, this seems to reduce inflammatory responses in your body, right? So it seems like it's less diseased, or it sort of suppresses disease to some degree. Maybe not to a huge degree, generally, but it does seem to suppress it. And science can't explain why that is. There's no reason for positive emotions to do that, right? Same thing with stress. Now, with stress, they usually appeal to this idea of cortisol, right? When you're stressed, usually it's because of you think I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they usually say the body perceives that, or the brain perceives that as some kind of threat, because the body is always stupid, right, in their eyes, right? It doesn't have an intelligence. But it perceives something as a threat, it releases cortisol, and it causes this sort of a response that induces stress. But I'm like, no, right? I suspect if I were to study it, you cannot explain how why is every negative emotion causing a cortisol response, right? If a cortisol response is due to fight or flight response, or anxiety or danger or threat, why is that happening when I feel the emotion of shame or something, or guilt? There's no reason for my body to release cortisol in that situation. That's not a threat. Yet, every single negative emotion, every emotion that feels negative, is going to cause a stressful effect on the body. You can't really explain that in terms of cortisol. There's no reason to release cortisol to every negative emotion. And also, even if you do release cortisol, I suspect there are many phenomena in the body that would occur you still can't explain in terms of cortisol. So you can't explain you can't explain the placebo effect, you can't explain stress, right? Or in psychosomatic responses in general, through a purely materialistic perspective of reality or perspective of the body, right? But if you appeal to a metaphysical perspective or dual perspective, which is physical and metaphysical, then it's very easy to explain, right? It's super easy to explain, and you can explain it in terms of this theory. And this is not the first framework of a theory to talk about the physical and metaphysical within the body. This is just one. However, this would explain the type of intelligence that you see in the body in response to your thoughts, right? And that's just one example. I suspect that there would be many examples if I really did the research, right? So ultimately, I believe that you cannot really explain the function of life in the body without appealing to chi energy. You can't really explain it through a solely materialistic perspective, right? If you observe certain things going on in the body's going to do things that just don't make sense in terms of Brownian motion or just random motion. Random unintelligent motion through the body. So that's basically would be the proof that would basically be the supporting evidence. I wouldn't call it proof, but supporting evidence of these ideas. Now you could probably, if you just do it transcendentally and just charge the energy directly through your mind, you would see an exponentially greater response or exaggerated response of this. So basically right now I'm just talking about the normal response in the body, which is stress, placebo effect. But if you charge it transcendentally, which would be more supernatural, you would see a much more exaggerated psychosomatic response, which would have to be considered supernatural. That, for the most part, would probably be proof. But, I don't really like to do stuff like that. But even like I said, if a scientist wanted to measure someone doing that, they'd have to watch them around the clock, 24 hours a day. Probably, I would guess for probably about a week it might take to charge your chi in a way that manifests a change in your body that you could notice. But even then, I've never done it. Depending on what you're trying to change, it could take a week, it could take months, who knows. And during that whole time, you'd have to watch someone 24 hours a day, 27 days a week, around the clock, because the second they go off camera, you're going to say, the scientists would say, oh, they did some sleight of hand, or they did something to sort of cause the changes that are being measured. So that would be the proper way to measure it. Of course, they never do that in science because they don't have a positive theory on how this stuff works. Usually they just make up some random sort of condition on if this stuff exists, it has to be this. We say it has to exist like this. And if it doesn't exist the way we say it can't possibly exist. That's basically the way atheists think. But anyway, going to this next point, this is more or less just a theory on how I think this might happen. It says chi energy may be able to cause changes in the body by impacting quantum probability, and photons would behave noticeably different in the body. So basically what I'm getting at there is I'm talking about, how do I want to word it? Basically I'm kind of referring to the concept of the aura. So what is the aura generally in a lot of these metaphysical circles? The aura is considered to be kind of this energy field around your body, or just a field around your body. It's presumed to show different colors that reflect your mood, but ultimately it's a reflection of your energy, your metaphysical energy in the metaphysical realm. But largely, I believe it would refer to your etheric body, or the state of your etheric body. And I believe that when your chi is manifesting change in your body, what it's doing, like I said, chi interacts with matter. And so I believe it's interacting with the matter in your body, right, at the level, the most quantum levels, right? And the most quantum levels would be photons, right, for electromagnetic energy. Photons are just packets of energy, these small, I think the tiniest packets of electromagnetic energy, right, would just be photons. At the quantum level, we know everything's pretty much probability, or at least we can't measure everything. We can only measure things using probability, and we know that there's no exact position, and there's no you can't precisely know position of momentum because things function like waves at a quantum level. And what it ultimately means is that at a quantum level, things are highly probabilistic, right? They don't have precise or definite states like they appear to in the macroscopic world. I suspect that what she does is it affects the way photons move in such a way that it can affect the sort of the way biological material forms. There's a lot of biological material, right? So DNA, RNA has to do with electrostatic sort of almost like hooks, right? So proteins, nucleotides, or DNA, they hook onto each other, right, by their shapes, and I believe they stick together to kind of electrostatic charges. And so I suspect, right, and the body's always changing, right? DNA's not always changing, but a cell is always changing, and it can mutate, right? So it can mutate, and that's by design. I believe that's by design, right? So if the body can occasionally mutate in a way that supports life. So if there's some disease, for example, and the body's constantly mutating, then the mutation that fights that disease is going to be the one that survives, right? And that's basically the idea of survival of the fittest and Darwinism and things like that, and evolution and things like that. But I believe this mutation is also impacted by your chi. So that has to do with the way you're thinking, the thing you're desiring, things like that can also affect the chi. Your chi can affect how your body mutates, right? Which affects evolution, things like that. And I believe that the way chi does it does it at the most fundamental level, having to do with the way your photons move. So that's highly theoretical. I don't really know if controlling photons at that scale results in changes in electrostatic manifestations of materials in your body. But that's just a theory. Right now, that's just a theory, right? So I'd have to look into it more. Maybe a scientist will look at that and say that makes absolutely no sense. Photons, even if you had perfect control of photons, it would never result in that type of change. Maybe, right? But that's kind of my theory on it so far. I haven't really looked into it further. I suspect that might be possible. And I also suspect that if you were to measure the action of photons inside the body, or it may perhaps even near the body, like on the skin or whatever, right? Which is, that's all still the body, but even near the body, like close to the skin or whatever, because that would still be an auric field. I suspect, and I could be wrong, but I suspect that you would see a slight change in the way photons behave. It wouldn't be exactly the same as when they're away from the body, right? And that would be an example of your auric fields, right? Because they always say there's no evidence of the auric field. But I suspect that would be the evidence, right? You would notice that electromagnetic energy, or photons, are doing something slightly different inside the body, or near the body, as opposed to anywhere else, right? Out in the world. And now, can you measure photons to that level of specificity? I mean, they're just light, right? I do not know. So that would be something I'd have to think about too. I'd have to talk to physicists about that. And maybe they've done that there's already been experiments like that and they've determined that's not true. I don't know. But that's something, like I said, I suspect. I sometimes think, how would you measure photons in general? I do know that there should be a way to measure when the way photons are moving. What is this? There was some experiment, something Compton. I read it so long ago. Compton effect, something like that, where I think they measured the experiment. But I don't know if you can measure it, or if they perform measurements on the scale necessary to test what I'm talking about, let alone inside the body, as opposed to outside the body. But right now, that's just a theory, right? I could be wrong about that. But that's something I suspect is the case. And if it's true, then chi, like I said, chi energy impacts or it affects your biology in terms of how people evolve, how they change, how their bodies change. It would even affect your kids and things like that. So, for example, If I just held, let's say I did this transcendentally, right? So I'm charging my chi using psychic energy. I charge my chi to, I can hold the intention to say build more muscle, right? And my chi would start manifesting change in my body. So it would go all throughout my body and it would start causing it to build more muscle. Now, like I said, that could be very dangerous because it could build muscle in places that aren't supposed to be more muscular, just like steroids. And so messing with your chi in that way could be very, very dangerous, which we'll talk a little more about that later too. But the last thing I want to talk about is this, and that says that biogenesis and evolution may occur in part due to chi energy. So now, if you're not familiar with biogenesis basically is just a term that refers to the phenomenon in which matter that's in a state that is not supporting life, it has nothing to do with life, it changes into a state where it's now supporting life, which is basically just a cell, right? And so, an evolution is just the change of a species in response to the environment or something like that. A biogenesis, there's a lot of research on this, right? Because there's something called origin of life research, right? Which is a hot topic, right? In that community, it's heavily debated, right, on how this occurs. There are people who say that it occurs more spiritually, or they have a little more religious or spiritual or metaphysical, really, context. They appeal to more metaphysical context to explain this. And then others, the atheists, they appeal to a more materialistic context. And everyone asked the question though, how did the first cell on Earth occur, right? Because evolution, a lot of times in science, you'll hear that we sort of evolved from this goop, right? So we evolved from some sort of biological goop in the early stages of the Earth. And you've probably heard that growing up all the time, and you've probably never questioned where we come from because you just heard that so much. It's been beaten into your head so much. But the truth is that evolution doesn't say that at all, right? And evolution never said that. At the very least, it never explained a biogenesis, right? And I don't think evolution's ever really been established or observed. It's kind of a stretch, right, to say that we evolved from sort of single-cell organisms, right? Evolution is not, I could be wrong, but I don't believe that it sort of has ever presented itself or ever presented evidence for that kind of a scale of change. It's never done that, let alone a biogenesis. You absolutely can't explain it use it to say how non-living matter comes together and forms living matter, which is a cell, right? So this is something that scientists don't really know how it occurs. You've never heard that because you've heard so much propaganda, right? But, many people have never heard that because there's been so much propaganda around this and people are just kind of led to think we have it all figured out and don't think about it. No, right? This is something we don't really know how this occurs. And although this is above my pay grade, right, there's a guy named, I forgot his name. It's something Tor. Yeah, so it's actually a guy named James Tor. So he's kind of a renegade in this community because he's a scientist, right? So he's a scientist who, I believe I heard his story before, but he said one day he was just kind of doing research into this stuff. He didn't really have much of an opinion about how a biogenesis occurs, and he's like an organic chemist, so he's into organic chemistry, and he says when he was looking at it, he realized that we absolutely have no idea how a biogenesis occurred. And the general belief in the science community is that it occurred by chance, right? So one day there was certain chemicals, organic chemicals in some soup, right? And it came together and just by random chance formed a cell. And that cell, once the cell was a cell, which it has now supports all the definitions of life, which means it adapts to its environment, those cells at some point started changing in a way that resulted in it evolving, right? And that's how life occurred. And so he says if you look at prebiotic conditions, which would have been the conditions on Earth where the first cells would have formed, he said if you look at those particular conditions and you study the organic chemistry, it's virtually impossible. It's impossible for a cell to just form by random chance. And he often says there isn't enough time in the universe. Because a lot of people will say, well, the Earth is roughly 5 billion years old. And, during that time, that's a long time for a cell to occur by chance. And he says, no, like having more time, he always says that time is your enemy, not your friend, right? Because you have to perform these reactions in a certain amount of time to form the cell. If you take too much time, then the cell just doesn't form, right? It's much harder for the cell to form past a certain amount of time. So time means nothing, right? So it doesn't help you to say that the Earth was around longer, right? Because the cell has to form in a very short amount of time. And so he says it's virtually impossible for a biogenesis to occur in prebiotic conditions. And so he has all these different conditions on basically a whole bunch of problems that basically are impossible to solve in these conditions. And it's not like one impossible condition. It's like many of them. He says that there are like all these different conditions where if we can even repeat one of these conditions today in the lab, he says he'll stop all his research and kind of shut up. Because he's, like I say, he's kind of a renegade in that community. They don't really like him because he kind of I think he's kind of speaks, I don't want to word it. He talks about origins of life research in a way that, one, makes scientists look like they don't know what they're doing, but two, also kind of hurts their funding, right? And so they need funding to do what they do. But so I believe they kind of like him for that reason. But he says, like, look, I'll shut up if you can just solve one of these problems in the lab with all the materials. You're allowed to have all the materials you want, but just solve just one of these problems. He has I don't forget how many it is. He has a couple of them. And he says no one's been able to do it, right? And he says that even if you gave a scientist all the different parts of the cell, all of them, and what are them? Like the membrane, the nucleus, the mitochondria. If you give them all of that stuff, they wouldn't know the first step in putting a cell back together. It's impossible. Even if they had it, let alone trying to form it from scratch with just basically organic chemicals. And so, and ultimately, in other words, what he says is we have absolutely no idea how a biogenesis has actually occurred, which is the first formation of life on Earth. And the biggest problem is probability, right? So the biggest problem that causes that is the probability issue, right? There's just, like he says, there just isn't enough time in the universe for cells to form by virtue of probability. And so what actually solves this probability problem? Chi energy, right? So it's exactly what I said before, right? There are going to be certain things the body does that you cannot explain in terms of random Brownian motion, right? There has to be an intelligence to it that you can't explain in terms of pure materialism. But you can explain it if you appeal to this concept of chi energy. Chi interacting with matter, impacting the random mutations and the sort of the things that the body does or the cell does that has to do with a sense of randomness. Chi is going to impact that, and it's going to impact it and sort of cause it to move toward a particular outcome, right? And we'll talk a little more about that when we talk about the transcendental nature of chi, because chi has like an intelligence to it. But yeah, it affects random events that are occurring in the organic chemistry, in the chemicals of the cell, in the body, and affects those random events to lean toward a particular outcome, which, in other words, because it's trying to manifest something, right? So if I want to manifest the intention to heal, my chi would affect random events that occur at the microscopic level in my cells and my DNA, and it would affect that so it leans toward the state associated with healing. It moves toward a state associated with a healed body. So that's what chi does. And if you appeal to that definition, then you can 100% get around that probability problem. You can now explain it, because that's the one issue you can't explain, is the probability. It seems like there's intelligence or a first cause, right, that's sort of causing this to occur. And it's just like I say, physics has never been able to explain first cause phenomena. It can't. And scientists always have this idea that at some point physics is going to be able to explain it, which is basically the mantra of atheism, that scientists will one day figure it out, right? They always, which is just faith, right? That's why I call it a religion. They call it, they always try to make it sound more legitimate by calling it a science. No, what you're talking about is faith, right? It's a religion. That's not science. The science 100% leans toward the metaphysical case, right? If you're practicing actual science, you would believe in metaphysics, or you would lean toward metaphysics. If you're practicing some faith-based religion, then you would lean toward materialism. It has way more holes in it than a metaphysical belief system or belief structure for science, a metaphysical theoretical foundation for science. And I always say that physics has never been able to explain any first cause phenomena. It can't explain the beginning of the universe. It can't explain free will. It can't explain emotions. It can't explain the nature of dreams, which that's also a first cause phenomena. It's far too random to be explained in terms of just what the brain is doing. By the way, they don't have to make predictions. We haven't talked too much about dreams yet, but once I do, you can actually make predictions. That's how a theory works. That's how science works. The materialist model doesn't make any predictions because it's incomplete. But you can't explain the nature of dreams. You can't even explain how people are able to move, right? So we talked about those before. Those are all first cause phenomena. Physics has never been able to explain first cause phenomena. And abiogenesis, from the looks of it, seems to be a first cause phenomena, which physics has never been able to explain. Like I said, and physicists or atheists always have this idea that one day we'll be able to explain it, and someday the science will figure it out. But if you appeal to the concept of chi, right, you could actually explain exactly how this occurs, right? That would be the missing link. In fact, we actually see an example of this possibility in the body already, right? So I just want to mention that here, that abiogenesis and evolution in general, these may occur as a result of chi energy. So chi energy ultimately supports life. Now, of course, for this to occur in terms of abiogenesis, there would have to be a consciousness or awareness, we could call it God, right? That's stimulating the biochemicals, the organic chemicals on the earth to change in a way to support life or manifest life. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's basically the idea of the etheric body and the way chi energy works. So this is basically a theoretical foundation that I sort of think of when I think about chi. So just to recap a little bit, so you have your body, you have your spirit, but then you also have a body that's kind of like in between, which would be called the etheric body. That body is basically just houses your chi energy. That body is basically consists of vessels, right? It's basically a field that surrounds your body, which we would call the auric field. And it consists of vessels that move all throughout your body into your different organs. And your body is constantly commanding your subconscious to express itself in such a way that's causing your chi to manifest or support life in your body. And the chi functions a little bit differently in your organs, in each organ, right? So your heart, the chi in your heart has a slightly different command from the chi in your muscles in your arms or legs, and the chi in your arms and legs and your heart functions, or what it's been commanded to do is slightly different from the chi in your brain, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the etheric body is manifesting chi throughout your body to help it support life, right? So in other words, your kidneys, for example, they function, but they function as well as they do because chi is constantly supporting it, right? It's supporting it on at a quantum level, that metaphysical or that supernatural metaphysical energies helping it to manifest functionality or vitality, and that helps it to support life. And like I said, I suspect that I don't know how, like let's say a person dies and you keep them alive, I don't know how long their etheric body sticks around or that chi sticks around. So it'll be hard to measure it because their body's just going to start to deteriorate without some spirit in it. Doesn't matter how much you try to keep it alive, it's going to deteriorate. And so what I was basically going to say is if you put a person's body in the condition where you presume the etheric body is no longer there, and then you see how it works, you could say, oh, it's functioning in a much more stupid way, like it doesn't have an intelligence compared to when your body was alive. But any decay like that, you could just associate to the person being dead. So these things are tough to test. However, I suspect, once again, that if you properly analyze the functionality of the kidneys or the lungs or the bladder, and I could be wrong about this, right? Because I haven't really studied this. But I suspect that if I studied this, I would see that there are certain things that the organs do that cannot be explained in terms of simple, stupid Brownian motion, which doesn't have intelligence. They would function in a way that seems like they have an intelligence that just can't be explained by simple physical matter, right? And that intelligence and that sort of intelligent behavior of your body is a result of chi energy, right? Supporting it and supporting life. So your etheric body basically supports life in your body. Your subconscious needs to be on a positive frequency to do that. So your body charges your subconscious in its ground state at a fairly positive frequency and that helps it to manifest vitality in your body through chi energy. When you charge a lot of negative emotions or you charge at a negative frequency, your subconscious is starting to get in the way of what your body's doing, commanding your subconscious to do. Because your body commands your subconscious to stay at the ground state, which is slightly positive. And if your mind's constantly charging negative energy, it dampens what your subconscious is doing in the ground state, so you lose vitality. And it's not just the absence of something. Your subconscious is also commanding your chi to do something slightly negative, slightly more destructive, which is where stress comes from, right? And ultimately, just to finish the recap, right? So your etheric body can also affect changes in your DNA that can result in disease, but also the way your body evolves. And chi, ultimately, if we think about an energy from God, that's chi. I mostly think about in terms of just the body, or us as people. But if there's some divine version of this, you would say God is responsible for the formation of life on Earth, and that's how you explain biogenesis. So yeah, in the next video, I think we're going to talk about chi, controlling your chi. We're going to start with what I call normal control, which is non-transcendental. But yeah, that's it for now, though. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.